So yes, guys, Nigeria almost deformed me. Like, I'm not joking. Nigeria almost deformed me. And if I'm talking about Nigeria, I'm talking specifically now about the healthcare system in Nigeria. And let me just get this out of the way. The Nigerian healthcare system is terrible. Very, very terrible. Yet, there are actually some good doctors and good hospitals in the mix. So I'm not putting everybody in the same boat and saying, okay, all the doctors are bad, all the hospitals are bad. No, I'm just saying that the Nigerian healthcare system is just horrible, and I almost fell victim to this healthcare system that could have cost me deformity. And I'm going to tell you all about the story right now. So I made a video some time ago about surviving sickle cell anemia, and if you have not watched that video, then you should click somewhere up here and watch the video, because I give more insight into living with sickle cell. But that's not what we're here for. But in that video, I mentioned about having to get my hips replaced, and that is where this particular gist comes in. So I had issues with my hips, and that is a complication that could happen when you have sickle cell anemia, because science, blood doesn't flow properly to the hips because of maybe frequent crises and things like that. So that could affect the hips, and it could begin to deteriorate, and it can happen to the shoulders as well. So yada yada yada, that happened, and I was having serious pains in the hip, and I had to have my hips replaced. But before then, there's no way that they can know that it's osteoporosis of the hip if they don't do an MRI, and the MRI would show when it's about the 4th stage or something like that. So anyway, I finally, after many months of suffering with the pain in the hip and all of the problems where I couldn't walk at some point, I was using, first of all, the walking stick, and then I went on to use the elbow crutch, and then I went to use the full crutches and everything, and then my hip was, getting, one was longer than the other, and then I was walking like this. I had to have my a raised shoe and all of that. All that chaos was going on. So anyway, I had to do the MRI finally, and they said, okay, I have osteoporosis of the hip and I have to have my hips replaced. But where do I do it? That's where all of the wahala started. So I went to Ibobi. So Ibobi is one of the most popular orthopedic hospitals in Nigeria, and it's government anyway. So I went there to see the doctor, and first of all, I had to be going there at around 7 a.m. Every time I had to go for an appointment, I had to be there by 7 a.m. If not, I would be late. And that doesn't mean that I will see the doctor anytime soon. I would have to see the doctor like many hours. In fact, I remember that most of the time I would either be leaving the place at either 3 o'clock or 4 p.m. So 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. And I came there around like 7 a.m. So the earliest time that I think I've ever left was maybe around 1. And that was like maybe once or twice max, because that's really not like possible. I usually used to leave there around like 3 o'clock to 4 p.m. And mind you, I will be sitting down in the waiting area, in the waiting area for my turn, and I'll be sitting down on the hip that is actually aching me, like I need to have that hip replaced, yet I'm being asked to sit down and wait for the doctor for hours. And I kept on thinking to myself, why can't they just make an appointment where when it's my time, I just come, because I know that's my time to see the doctor, and I walk in, as opposed to me waiting for hours just to see the doctor when I'm going through hell. But that's not even the point. So I was to do the hip replacement, and I went to see the doctor. Now this doctor, because this same period, like November 2013, but of course, when I was seeing the doctor, it was way earlier, but it was still that same year. And this doctor was the head of orthopedic surgeons in Nigeria. That guy, I'll give you guys the gist. Anyway, so I saw this guy, and they told me that they had to do the the posterior or lateral method of the hip replacement. So the posterior being from the back, and the lateral being from the hip. So the cut from either the side or the back. And those were the only two methods that they were doing in Nigeria at that time. And I was like, all right. what does that entail? And then I started to hear all the bass blows from left, right, center. They were telling me that, first of all, I will not be able to bend down, I will not be able to pick anything, as in I won't be able to pick things up. And I remember asking the doctor, are you saying that if I have a child, I will not be able to pick that child up? And he was like, yes, that's what it means. And I was like, wow. But I had no choice because I was in immense pain and I needed to have that thing done because there was no way I was going to have a normal life without having the hip replacement done. So I was like, okay, since I'm stuck with it, then it made several other restrictions. I cannot sit down on normal chairs. So if I have to sit on this kind of chairs, I'll have to put a lot of pillows over it before I can sit down. And I need to go around with probably a raised chair or a raised pillow, so that if I want to even use the toilet outside, I have to use a raised seat to use the toilet outside. And I was like, that's not going to happen in Nigeria. We have been going around with toilet seats and I want to use the toilet. It doesn't just make any sense. But I was like, okay, I'm stuck with this thing. That's my life. I have to deal with it. And then they said the surgery, because I had the both hips had the problem, so I had to have both hips replaced. And they said that they couldn't do the two at the same time, that one hip would have to be done first. Now, the first hip that had to be done, I would be in the hospital for 3 whole months just to recover from the surgery. Then afterwards, I would be discharged to go home, but I won't get back to my normal activity. I'll have to stay home and have very, very minimal activity for about another extra 3 months. Then when it's 6 months after the surgery, I will have probably fully recovered from the surgery. Then I can have the second hip done. So that means for 6 months, when I've had the first hip replaced, the other hip is still paining me like hell, and I cannot still have my normal day activity until I now have the second hip replaced 6 months after, and then I'll start that whole journey again, which is another 6 months of recovery, making a total of about 1 year of my life just recovering because they did a hip replacement. But I was like, man, okay, so this is what I have to do. Like, this is something that I have no choice. I have to do this thing. So I was like, okay, sign me up for it. And I was in so much, pain at that point. I was so sad. I felt like 1 year of my life was going to be wasted. I felt like this was really going to be bad. And they told me that even when they do the hip replacement, one leg might still be longer than the other, and so I might end up limping. So I won't be sitting, I won't be walking normally again. I'll be limping when I'm walking, and that I'll have a lot of restrictions. As I said, I won't be able to bend down, I won't be able to kneel down, I won't be able to pick up things, I won't be able to pick up things like heavy things from the ground. I won't be able to do so many things. And I was like, oh God, because the reason why I cannot do all those things is because it could remove. The hip could shift or remove. And I was like, after spending that much money, of course I had to be extra careful. So that was where all of those rules were put in place. And I was like, God, do I have to do this? But I had no choice. So I said, yes, okay. So I paid for the surgery. Now, I didn't pay the whole thing. I paid part payments because you had to make part payment before the surgery so they could get all the things set up. And they were to get the prostheses, but that's where everything flipped. So I paid part of the payment for them to get the prostheses, but they couldn't find my size of my beautiful, my beautiful hip. So they said they had to wait to get my size. And during that waiting period, that's when miracles just started to happen left, right, and center. You know when they say that God orchestrates things for his children's favor? That's what legit happened in my case. So as I was waiting for it, because I already resigned myself to having to be like this, as in knowing that I would probably be deformed after the surgery, but at least I'll be alive. Since I have no choice, at least it's still better than nothing. It's still better than living in pain every single day. So I was like, okay, let me go ahead with it. And then my dad saw an article in Punch newspaper. Thank you, Punch newspaper. God used you for me. So my dad saw an article in Punch newspaper about hip replacement. So he tore it out and gave it to me. I was like, okay, see this article that I saw in Punch newspaper, and I was like, okay, let me look at it. And then I saw anterior hip replacement, and I was like, anterior hip replacement. I wasn't told about this. I was only told about posterior and lateral, and I was like, okay, let me read up about it. So I started googling. I'm a Google freak. I can search for anything on Google. I can find anybody on Google. I'm very good at using Google. So I just went to Google, search, and then I saw that there was not just ordinary anterior hip replacement, but there was the anterior minimal invasion. I was like, okay, this sounds interesting, and it had a lot of nice things being said about it. The restrictions that I was going to have with the other method wasn't going to be there. Virtually all of the restrictions were going to be off. The recovery rate was really better and faster, and everything was just looking so perfect. So I was like, this thing might not be true. Like, if they're not doing it in Nigeria, and besides, I was having my doctor then was the head of the orthopedic surgeons in Nigeria, as I heard at that time. So I was like, I mean, he should know this. So if it's not in Nigeria, maybe it has a fatality side to it, or there's something bad about it. So I was still doing my research, and then I saw a contact. So I noticed that they only did it in France and in South Africa at that time, those two countries. And I thought France would be expensive. Let me try South Africa out. South Africa, our neighbor, yeah. So I was like, okay, let me contact the doctor in South Africa. And I saw call me anytime policy. So I was like, he has a call me anytime policy is a lie, because in Nigeria, you have to sit for hours to see the doctor. This one is just a phone call away. It's not possible. So I picked up my phone and I dialed, and he picked up, and I was like, and I was shocked. And the guy was just talking in his huge South African accent. I couldn't hear anything. I was so excited. So I said, okay, I'll send you an email because I can't really hear you very well. And then I sent him an email. He responded immediately. We started to chat back and forth and started to discuss everything. And I sent him, x-rays and different kind of things, like via digital x-rays and things like that. He saw everything, and he was like, man, how are you coping? How are you able to cope with all of this? Like, you're supposed to have had this hip replacement since like forever. This is not something you should keep on doing. Like, we need to do this thing right now. He was so sweet. He was so nice. Now, I've not gotten any of that in Nigeria, because the doctors here were mean. Like, they just didn't have that human touch to it. They didn't feel for people. Like, it was just like, you don't know what you're going through. I remember one saying that there's no painkiller that you can use that would help you. I mean, you're in serious pain. There's no painkiller that can help you. So, I mean, you just have to do the surgery. And he was so mean about it, and I cried afterwards. So I remember that they were mean, but this guy was so sweet. And he really explained how the whole hip replacement thing was going to go about, how it was going to be fast and everything. And I was like, okay. So I said, let me ask my doctor in Nigeria. Perhaps he can give me another side to it, because it's good to have two opinions. That way you can have a better understanding and make a better decision. So I went back to Ibobi to see this doctor. So when it was my turn, finally, after waiting for hours, I asked him, I said, sir, I read about anterior minimal invasion method, and I went to just find out if and what that is about, and if that is done here, and I mean, is it better or something like that. And this guy went mad at me. Like, he was just upset. He was like, my dear, can you look outside? There are a lot of people that are waiting to do this surgery. You are now here because you have now gotten to the end. You're now feeling like you can now start asking me questions. If you don't want to do the surgery, don't do the surgery, because people are ready to take your place. Hey, sir, it is my body. I need to know what you want to do in my body. And is it wrong for me to ask you what you're doing, or if I have heard about another method, maybe you can educate me on why you're not using that method or anything? He was just really upset about it. So he didn't see me that day. He decided to send me off to another doctor, and another junior doctor, right? So I was, of course, pissed. Even my dad talked to him, and he was still very annoying at the end of the day. So I moved to the junior doctor, and I asked the junior doctor as well, so that I heard this, and the doctor was like, that how are they supposed to be able to see the hip, to be able to do the surgery if they do it in the anterior? I was like, well, I don't know. Like, yeah, I'm not the doctor, but I heard that there's anterior minimal invasion. And he was like, well, I don't know that one, but we don't do it here, this and that. What we do is posterior, and I've been doing it for many years, and so I made up my mind that there was no way possible that I was going to do the surgery in Nigeria. First of all, there was no way I could subject myself to that doctor to cut me. There was no way, because he was so arrogant. I later heard that surgeons are usually the most arrogant of the doctors, but I really don't care. I mean, you're going to cut somebody, you have to explain what you want to do and how the process is going to be like and everything. So I made up my mind I wasn't doing the surgery with this doctor anymore. So I decided to contact this doctor in South Africa, and I'm going to leave the details down below so that you can contact him too. So he is a doctor in South Africa. As when I did the surgery, he was in Panorama Medic Clinic in Cape Town, South Africa. And Dr. Jean Joubert, I would leave his contact details. If you need his contact details, maybe you should reach out and I'll probably send to you, because he's a fantastic doctor anyway. So I then contacted him and made final arrangements. You know that I made all the arrangements and everything from here without having to go there to see the doctor. That's a possibility. It can actually happen. Nigeria, did you know that it can actually happen where you make arrangements without being in the hospital at all? So I made all the arrangements, I got the bill and everything, and I gave it to my dad. I was like, Dad, this is the bill, bam. And he was like, hey. And to be honest, the bill in South Africa, like for the surgery, and the bill in Nigeria wasn't that much of a gap. The cost that was going to make it a bit more expensive was that of the flights and the accommodation and all of that there, that really made it to go a bit higher. But the real surgery in itself was very close to the same price. And for me, being that it was a whole lot better, I saw it as something that was really great. So after we made all of the necessary arrangements, we decided to fly to South Africa to have the surgery done. When I got to South Africa, the very moment I landed, I went straight to the hospital. I was admitted that same day. I made the payment that same day. And the next day, I had the first hip done. Now, in South Africa, now this is where I am coming to give you the difference and how Nigeria really almost deformed me. So in South Africa, first thing first, they can do the surgery at the same, for the two hips, the same day. Flat. Like, they don't have to wait for 6 months to do the other hip. It can be done the same day. But for my case, because of my genotype, they had to consider that, and so they decided to do that some weeks after. So they said that they would do it perhaps like a month after, but they would see how I fare after the first hip that is done, and if I'm doing well, then the date can be brought back and I'll do the surgery faster. So I had the first hip done, and guess what? 24 hours after the surgery, I was on my feet, as in I was standing on the hip, because they had done the surgery and it was fine. I was standing on my hip, and I was discharged the day after. I was discharged a day after. And do you understand what that means? That is a day after surgery. You're out of the hospital a day after surgery. Meanwhile, if I had done it in Nigeria, I would have been in the hospital for a whole 3 months. Do you see that gap? Like, that huge gap? That's not all. So when I was discharged from the hospital, I was told to immediately start walking, because the more I walk, the better the muscles get as they acclimatized to the hip and blah, 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 the science, yada, yada, yada. So I started to walk. So I was walking, but I couldn't walk so much because the other hip was hurting. But because I recovered so well that 10 days after the surgery of the first hip, I had the second hip done. 10 days after. So when I did the second hip, of course, the same thing happened. 24 hours, I was told to stand and walk. And I was discharged the day after. And then I left the hospital and I was walking and I was fine. So I remember that 2 days or 3 days after the surgery, I walked from the guest house to the hospital. Now, the guest house is a bit of a distance from the hospital, but not that much. But I walked from the guest house to the hospital on my hips without crutches, without anything. Like, I walked. Can you imagine? And so within 14 days, that's 2 weeks, I was completely done with the entire process. And then that same month, I went back to Nigeria and finally dropped the crutches permanently, like permanently. As soon as I landed in Nigeria, I think the day after, I dropped the crutches, because I went there in November 2013, and by December, I think December 5 or 6 or thereabout, or whatever, or early December anyway, I had already dropped the crutches entirely, because I was even using the crutches just because if I get tired at some point, then I can use it to support, not that I necessarily needed it. So I was well, like, quickly. Now to the very fantastic part, the disparity between the legs, that one leg being higher than the other, was perfected. So both hips are equal, like there is no limping, there is no nothing. That was perfected because the doctor assured me that that was what was going to happen, that the surgery would actually correct that. And the second thing was that all of the nonsense restrictions that they gave me in Nigeria, that I cannot bend down, I cannot do this, I cannot do that, I could do all of that. The only thing that I was told to not do was to run and jog, because of course that would put a lot of pressure on the hip. But it said that if it is necessary, like maybe there's an emergency and I have to run, yes, I can run, there's no big deal. But it's just that I mustn't, run so much every time to put a lot of pressure on the hip, because it's not just good for it on the long run. But for emergency situations, I can actually run, like there's no big deal, there's no scare of it removing or any of that. So now there's another extra gist that I want to give about this thing, for you to see the wrap of how God rescued me from this Nigeria and the Nigerian healthcare system, everything. So there's something called thrombosis. This is when there's a blood clot in a particular part of your body, and it's very dangerous because if it escapes from that place where it is, it can go straight to the heart and cause instant death. And this can happen when you do a surgery, but the doctors, they already can foresee that that's a possibility, so they make preparations for that. So they gave me certain drugs to allow the blood to flow better, and they gave me certain socks and certain things for me to wear to reduce the possibility of that even happening in the first place. So I didn't have any of that thrombosis. I did not have any nerve problem when they did the hip replacement. But when I was at Ibobi, I made some connections with the people that were there. So I had conversations with them, and some of them did the surgery in Ibobi, and the reports was horrible. A lot of them had the nerve problem, a lot of them had the thrombosis. They had to help them. Some people had serious medical complications. A lot of people had to have the hips done again because there was a mistake or there was something wrong with the first time that they did it, so they had to repeat it again. So that means extra time for somebody to be stuck. People had very serious complications, but for my case, it was just perfect. Like there wasn't anything, and it wasn't because it was just an isolated scenario that I was just lucky. Yes, I was lucky. I was favored by God to go to the right place, but it was more so that apart from the fact that God even helped me and directed me to the right place to do it, but at least people knew what they were doing and they were able to give me the proper care that I needed. And they were not stuck up. They were able to explain everything. Like before I did the surgery, the guy showed me the parts, showed me how he was going to do it, what would go here, what would go there. There was a minimal cut. The scar is so minimal. I mean, it was just fantastic. Now, I'm not doing this just because I want to just lambast the Nigerian system, but I'm doing it particularly because I know that a lot of people are going through this hip replacement issue, especially if you have sickle cell. A lot of people have this issue because it was only when I went there that I discovered that a lot of people were dealing with this. So if it's possible to spare a little extra bucks to have the surgery done outside of Nigeria, and I would say outside of Nigeria being South Africa, at that place, because I know that people were doing the surgery at India or London and it wasn't still good. So it's not about abroad things. So this was this particular place, and the method that they were using was actually quite good. So I can recommend him, and I'm just doing this to say that if you want to have that surgery done, this thing is not paid. I wasn't paid. It doesn't even know I'm going to do this. This is like how many years after, because that was done in 2013. I'm just doing this now because I just felt to gist you this. So I would advise you to spend that extra bucks because it will give you that quality of life that you would love and you will not regret. Yes, it's going to cost you a bit more, but at least I think it is worth it so that you can get about your daily activities. You can walk, you can jump, you can go about your life and play and have fun and just enjoy yourself and know that Nigeria did not mess up with your life. If I did it there, I would definitely not be like this today. I would definitely be having issues. I would definitely be having a deformity in my movements, in my body, in something. I would have terrible scars. I would be insecure, or I would have a lot of things that would be wrong. And it would not be because it had to be, or it was a situation that was unavoidable. This is something that could have been avoided. So a lot of people are going through things that they shouldn't even necessarily have to go through, because the healthcare system is just bad. And it's so terrible that doctors that are supposed to know better, I mean, it's your field. You can't tell me that a surgery that has been going on for like maybe 10 years, you don't know that it exists, and it's your field, it's your forte. You're supposed to be knowledgeable about this. You don't know that. So I'm doing this video again, as I said, to give you guys awareness about this, and for you to get a better help, and for you to just know that God is the master orchestrator. He's the one that enabled somebody to write in Punch newspaper about the hip replacement. He's the one that prompted me to decide to take action about it. It was the one that prompted me to call the doctor. It was the one that prompted me to have all of that connection. It just connected all the dots for my favor. So they say that Ashiri ló ń sọ pé kò sí Ọlọ́run. That's the mad person, is the person that says that there is no God. That's the truth. It's only someone that is insane that would say that there is no God. Because for me, there is definitely a God that is orchestrating things for the favor of his children. And miracles doesn't necessarily have to be only when the thing just disappears. Miracles happen also when God directs you in a wonderful, miraculous way that is beyond your comprehension. It just makes a way for you. It just parts the sea for you to cross well. And that is the miracle that happened for me this particular time. So yeah, Nigeria almost deformed me, but I escaped because of God. Thank you so much for watching to the very end. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll have more interesting gists for you as the time goes. So see you same time next week. Have a lovely day. Bye.